Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Jesus Is. My name is Pat Gunning. I'm the youth minister at Sacred Heart Church in Ocean Beach in San Diego, California. And this weekend, we have an awesome holiday, the 4th of July, which is Independence Day, as we all know. And I thought this could be a good opportunity to talk a bit about the separation of church and state. And that's a line that a lot of people like to throw out there, like, oh, the church and state are separate. And that's true, they are. But I wanted to kind of go a bit deeper on what that means and what that looks like, and ultimately what God wants for us as a society. So the church and state both have roles to play in God's plan that are complementary and yet distinct. So they both seek the common good, to promote and defend the common good, but in different ways. So the state seeks to promote the common good for the temporal good, which is their focus is on the material needs that are part of earthly life, right? The church is focused on the spiritual good, which is our need for God's grace. It's on our faith. So the proper relationship must be there. They must have a proper relationship because both our body and soul are inseparably united. And so in the same way, church and state are also inseparably united. They're separate and yet united. So the state, in terms of the spiritual good, must allow everyone to pursue the spiritual good. And this includes individuals and the church. The church also must promote and defend the temporal good when it concerns human rights and the salvation of souls. So the church has learned that it's difficult to maintain its autonomy and independence in its relationship to the state. We've seen this in the past. The state has tried to control the church, and the church has tried to control the state. For example, in China, the Communist Party in China claimed the authority to approve Catholic bishops. So then what you get is two Catholic churches in China, one that's approved by the government and then one that's approved by the church, which is an underground church that's in union with Rome and not approved by the government. On the flip side, we've also seen popes be kings, and this leading to great corruption in the church and led us to having what we call anti-popes, because now there were people outside the church who were trying to elect certain popes to be the pope, but these were popes that weren't approved by the church. And so they were the anti-popes, but then you had the popes that were actually elected by the cardinals of the church, and those were the ones that were actually in union with the church. So we see how the two can get kind of like intermingled in really nasty ways, which is why they need to have a proper relationship for them both to be able to flourish. So to maintain the church's independence from the state, the church insists on having the following rights. The first one is the freedom to preach the gospel and to evangelize, and respecting other religions as they do that as well. To the freedom to provide public worship and administer the sacraments, so to have parishes like we have Sacred Heart. Freedom to determine the church's structure and organization, so the way the church chooses to have leadership, to build these churches, all these things. It's the church's responsibility and freedom to determine how this goes about. The freedom to select, educate, and appoint its ministers, so who it appoints to be cardinals, bishops, priests, pope. The freedom to construct religious buildings and to acquire and manage the material goods necessary for the church's ministry. So all the nitty-gritty finance details, all that stuff, getting people to come and construction workers to build a church, things like that. The church gets to choose that. It's not under the state's jurisdiction on what the church will look like, how much it'll cost, all those things. It's the church's funds, it's the church's resources, and it's the church's buildings. Finally, the freedom to develop associations for cultural, educational, healthcare, and other works of charity and justice. In regards to political affairs, the church recognizes limits when it comes to political affairs. For one, the church does not align with any particular political party or system. Okay, so the church is not Republican or Democratic. The church is concerned with moral and religious principles that are at stake. So it'll take a position on a certain view, but not necessarily a party. But also, bishops and priests don't run for office. They ran into trouble with this in the past with the popes being elected, and so now the church stays separate of this in regards to political affairs. They let the state handle that. But the church isn't afraid to protest or to speak out when the state is pushing for laws that are morally or religiously wrong. And so church does not take one political stance. Overall, the church and state are separate, and yet they must have a proper relationship as they naturally have common interests, and to avoid there being extremes of, on one end, forced religion, and on the other side, religious oppression. We as humans are made up of body and soul, and as a world, we are made up of church and state that are important for us in many common and also distinct ways. By having a good relationship between church and state, there can be peace and fulfillment of all of our needs, both temporal and spiritual. I hope you all have a really awesome 4th of July weekend, and God bless.